That night, everyone in the studio knew they were witnessing the end of something, but no one was ready. May 22, 1992. Studio 3 at NBC Burbank. The lights were warm, the cameras rolling, the audience seated in their usual rows. But something felt different. The air itself seemed heavier, like the building knew what was coming. Johnny Carson sat behind his desk, the same desk he'd sat behind for 30 years, 5 nights a week, through presidents and wars and moon landings and assassinations. The desk where America came to laugh before going to sleep. But tonight, there would be no sleeping. The show had started like any other. Doc Severinsen and the band played the familiar theme. Ed McMahon gave his booming introduction. Johnny walked through the rainbow curtain with that signature swing in his step, waving to the crowd. The monologue rolled out smoothly, jokes about politicians and current events, the rhythm he perfected over 3 decades. Laughter filled the studio. Everything seemed normal. But if you looked closely, you could see it. In the way Johnny's hand lingered a moment too long on the desk. In the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. In the pauses between jokes that stretched just a beat longer than usual. Ed McMahon noticed. Doc Severinsen noticed. The producers in the booth noticed. And slowly, the audience began to notice too. Carson stopped mid-monologue. The entire studio froze. He'd been setting up a joke about Congress when he simply stopped. His hand went to the stack of cue cards on his desk, but he didn't pick them up. Instead, he looked down at them for a long moment, then looked back up at the camera. Not at the audience. At the camera. At America. "You know," he said quietly, his voice different now, stripped of the performer's polish. "I've been doing this for a long time." The audience didn't know whether to laugh. Was this part of the bit? Ed leaned forward slightly in his chair, concern flickering across his face. Johnny never broke character like this. Never. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. To understand what happened that night, you have to go back. Not just to the beginning of The Tonight Show, but to who Johnny Carson really was when the cameras weren't rolling. The man America knew was brilliant, quick-witted, perfectly timed. He could defuse any awkward moment, turn any mishap into comedy gold, make any guest feel like the most interesting person in the world. But there was another Johnny. The one who arrived at the studio 3 hours early to read every newspaper, every briefing, to prepare those cue cards himself. The one who personally called audience members who'd written letters about losing a loved one. The one who paid for struggling comedians' rent without telling anyone. The one who visited children's hospitals on Christmas without photographers. That Johnny rarely appeared on camera. He kept the armor on. The smile, the suit, the perfect delivery. It was safer that way. More professional. He could control the narrative, keep the show moving, never let anyone see him sweat. But on May 22, 1992, that armor was starting to crack. The show continued after that strange pause. Johnny recovered, finished the monologue, went to commercial. During the break, a producer rushed down from the booth. "You okay?" she whispered. Johnny nodded, said something about being tired, waved her off. But his hands were shaking slightly as he straightened his tie. The first guest came out. An actress promoting a summer movie. Johnny did his job perfectly, asked the right questions, laughed at the right moments, kept the energy up. But during commercial breaks, he kept looking at something on his desk. A small piece of paper, folded once, tucked under his coffee mug. Ed McMahon saw it too. He'd been beside Johnny for 30 years. He knew every tell, every signal. And he knew that piece of paper wasn't supposed to be there. The second guest was a comedian, young and hungry, someone Johnny had championed from obscurity. The kid was nervous, stumbling over his words. Normally, Johnny would have gently steered him back on track, made him look good, set him up for success. But tonight, Johnny did something different. He stopped the interview. Not aggressively. Not rudely. He just stopped. Put down his cards. Looked at the young comic with an expression that was hard to read. And then he said very quietly, "Do you know why you're here tonight?" The comic blinked, confused. To promote my... No, Johnny interrupted gently. I mean really. Do you know why you're sitting in that chair? The audience was dead silent. This wasn't banter. This wasn't a bit. This was something else. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. The young comedian didn't know how to respond. Johnny leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower, intimate, like they were the only two people in the room. 27 years ago, I sat where you're sitting. I was terrified. Jack Parr was behind this desk, and I thought I was going to throw up. But he looked at me the way I'm looking at you right now, and he said something I never forgot. He said, "This isn't about being funny. It's about being true." The comic's eyes were wide. Ed McMahon's chin had started to tremble slightly. Doc Severinsen had put down his trumpet. I didn't understand what he meant then, Johnny continued. I thought he was being poetic or something. But after 30 years behind this desk, I finally get it. Comedy isn't about the jokes. It's about the moment when someone watching at home, alone, maybe scared or sad or lost, hears something that makes them feel less alone. That's the job. That's the only job that matters. He paused, picked up that folded piece of paper from under his coffee mug. Last week, I got a letter, he said, his voice starting to crack now, the first real crack in 3 decades of perfect broadcasts. From a woman in Ohio. She's 83 years old. She wrote to tell me that her husband died 6 months ago, and they used to watch the show together every night for 40 years. And now she watches it alone, and she says it's the only 30 minutes of her day when she doesn't feel like he's completely gone. The studio was absolutely silent. Not the silence of waiting for a punchline. The silence of held breath, of suppressed tears, of collective realization. Johnny looked directly into camera 1. Her name is Margaret. And Margaret, if you're watching tonight, I want you to know something. Your husband isn't gone. He's in every laugh you shared watching this show. He's in every inside joke you had about Ed's laugh or Doc's jackets. He's in the routine you built together, night after night, year after year. That's not gone. That never goes. His voice broke completely on the last word. For the first time in 30 years, America saw Johnny Carson cry on television. Ed McMahon wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Tears streamed down his face. Doc Severinsen's hand was over his mouth. In the audience, people were openly sobbing. The cameramen in the booth were wiping their eyes, trying to keep the shot steady. Johnny took a moment, composed himself slightly, though his eyes were still wet. I'm sorry, he said, with a small, broken laugh. This wasn't supposed to. I had a whole thing planned. There were jokes about golf and retirement and Jay Leno's chin. A ripple of soft laughter mixed with tears from the audience. But I realized something today, sitting in my dressing room, looking at that desk one more time. I realized that the best moments of this show were never the jokes. They were the moments when I got to be real with you. When I got to sit here and talk to you, America, not as a performer, but as a person. He picked up his cue cards, looked at them for a moment, then gently set them aside. I don't need these anymore. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Johnny stood up from behind the desk. In 30 years, he'd done this maybe a dozen times, always for a specific bit or physical comedy moment. But this time was different. He walked slowly to the front of the stage, right to the edge where the studio lights met the darkness of the audience. I want to tell you what I'm going to miss, he said, his voice steadier now, but still thick with emotion. I'm not going to miss the schedule or the pressure or the constant need to be on. I'm going to miss you. He pointed out into the audience, then at the cameras. All of you. The studio audience who came here after waiting months for tickets. The people watching at home in your living rooms and bedrooms and hospital rooms and dorm rooms and nursing homes. The ones who laughed with me, who wrote me letters, who made this job the greatest privilege of my life. A stage manager was frantically signaling from the wings. They were running over time. Commercial breaks had been missed. The network was probably having a heart attack. Johnny saw the signals and deliberately turned away from them. You know what the secret is? He asked, almost to himself. To doing this for 30 years and not burning out or becoming cynical or losing the joy. It's remembering that on the other side of that camera lens is a real person. Someone who had a hard day. Someone who's lonely. Someone who just wants to smile before they turn off the light. He pulled something from his jacket pocket. A small photograph, creased and worn. This is a picture of my son, Ricky. He died in a car accident in 1991. He was 39 years old. The audience gasped softly. Johnny had never, ever spoken about this publicly. The pain was still so fresh, the wounds still raw. After he died, I didn't know if I could keep doing this show. How do you come out here and tell jokes when your world has ended? How do you pretend everything is fine when nothing is fine? He looked at the photograph, his thumb running gently over the image. But then I read the letters. Hundreds of letters from people who had lost children, lost parents, lost spouses, lost everything. And they all said the same thing: thank you for still showing up. Thank you for still being there. Thank you for giving us 30 minutes where we could forget the pain. He looked back up at the camera, tears streaming freely now. That's when I understood what Jack Parr meant. This isn't about being funny. It's about being present. It's about showing up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because someone out there needs you to show up. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Johnny walked back to his desk, but he didn't sit down. Instead, he placed the photograph of his son on the desk, right in the center, where the cue cards usually sat. I'm not going to give you a list of people to thank, he said. That's what everyone expects. But you know what? This moment isn't about me. It's about all of us. Every single person who made this show possible. Every crew member and writer and musician and guest and audience member and viewer at home. We did this together. He turned to Ed McMahon, who was barely holding it together. Ed, you've been my friend for longer than most marriages last. You've laughed at terrible jokes, covered for my mistakes, and been the best sidekick a host could ask for. But more than that, you've been the best kind of person to have beside you when the world gets scary. Thank you for being my constant. Ed couldn't speak. He just nodded, tears running into his collar. Johnny turned to Doc Severinsen and the band. Doc, you made every night feel like a party. Even when the jokes bombed, even when the show was falling apart, you were there with that trumpet and that smile, reminding us that music can save anything. Thank you for the soundtrack to 30 years of my life. Doc raised his trumpet in a silent salute, his own eyes wet. Then Johnny looked directly into the camera one last time. And to you, America. Thank you for inviting me into your homes. Thank you for trusting me with your nights. Thank you for laughing with me, crying with me, growing old with me. Thank you for making a kid from Nebraska feel like he belonged somewhere. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. I'm going to miss you so much. The studio was completely silent except for the sound of people crying. Even the hardened camera operators, who'd seen everything, were struggling to keep their composure. Johnny picked up that letter from Margaret, the one he'd read earlier. Margaret, this letter is going in a frame. And it's going on my wall at home. Because it's going to remind me every single day why I got to do the best job in the world. Not because I was talented or lucky, but because people like you let me be part of your family. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his jacket pocket, right over his heart. Then he did something that became one of the most iconic images in television history. He blew a kiss to the camera. Not the playful, theatrical kiss he'd done 1,000 times before. A real one. Slow, deliberate, full of love and gratitude and goodbye. Good night, he whispered. Doc Severinsen lifted his trumpet and played the theme one last time, but slower, softer, like a lullaby. The audience rose to their feet, applauding through tears. Ed McMahon stood beside him, his hand on Johnny's shoulder. And then the cameras faded to black. The next morning, Margaret from Ohio called NBC. She wanted them to know that she'd watched every second. That she'd cried. That she'd felt her husband beside her one more time. The receptionist who took the call cried too. That letter Johnny put in his pocket? He kept it in a frame by his bedside until the day he died in 2005. Next to a photograph of his son. Next to the cue card from his very first Tonight Show monologue. Because some goodbyes aren't endings. They're promises kept. They're reminders that we were here, that we mattered, that we made someone feel less alone in the dark. Johnny Carson didn't just say goodbye to America that night. He showed us what it means to be human on television. To be vulnerable. To be real. To be present. And 30 years later, we still miss him.